welcome to This Month in Cyber for September. We appreciate you being faithful to listening about things that have occurred in the world of cybersecurity. I think this is our 62nd episode of doing these. So go back in time and see the events. Sometimes they don't change much over time, and other times there's new things happening in the security world. We have got a pretty packed agenda, in terms of the items there. There's a fair amount that occurred both I went to this new format where we kind of talk about things that came from the news, things we've learned from, I'll call it from the trenches or from working day in and day out at some customer environments, and then just a list of some vulnerabilities that have occurred throughout the month and make sure that we're up to speed on that for our patching and regimens. As always, I like to make mention and draw reference back to the NIST cybersecurity framework for the idea that not everything can be prevented and protected against. We are going to have things that either slip through, and when they slip through, we certainly have the capability to hopefully detect those. Because we're able to detect them, we're able to respond to them and or recover from them. So it is a full-fledged cybersecurity program that takes in all of these elements. So with that, let's kind of get into some data. I found an interesting article, kind of talked about top 10 things you should be knowing about, and they called it top 10 surprising stats from the world of cybersecurity. Sometimes these things are a little bit fluffy, but I thought some of these were quite meaningful, and certainly check out the link for the top 10 when you receive the deck. This one's number 5. I often read stats about revenue loss in dollar figures, and but this one I kind of liked because it's percentage based. So no matter what your percentage is, no matter what size you are, rather, as an organization, 30% will lose revenue during a cybersecurity event. That's kind of the left graphic. And 40% of those that did lose revenue are going to lose 20% or more revenue. So let's think about ourselves as a $10 million firm or a $100 million firm, keeping the numbers easy. You're going to lose either $2 million or $20 million in revenue in your first year due to that event. So it really can have a dramatic impact on revenue, and that's what we're fighting this uphill battle, and that's why we spend money on security, right? Is to stave off the protection for that. We also have a slide, the next one. We've used what we call the Titanic or the Iceberg Slide in the past to represent the same idea, because it is true. It does come from a Deloitte study that's down there, but the idea is that you're going to spend considerable sums on your legal team, your incident response team, which might have some forensics, might have a restoration team. In fact, Peters and Associates often does a lot of restore for our customers, but we're not doing at least the deep dive forensics and things of that nature. But all of the costs that you're spending in that space are going to pale in comparison. In fact, they'll only be 10% of the cost from lost data, lost reputation, lost productivity of your employees, and possibly lost customers as part of that. So breaches in general are expensive. And hopefully not telling you anything but these are some interesting stats. And I guess for this list, I might find as we head into October, which is Security Awareness Month, this might be a decent list to share with executives. The final one I'll give you is obviously we do not want this to happen to anyone, right? We will help you, we'll advise you. Obviously, security guidance and efforts are not free, but they also don't have to be unlimited, right? There are things that you can control, and there's only so security mature can you be. You get to determine that in terms of where you want to be on the cybersecurity maturity model, but at some point you have to accept risks, and everybody does. You cannot be 100% safe, but this is something where at least you want to be conscious of your choices, know where your vulnerabilities are, and know that you can only afford so many protections to be put in place to be still an organization that is financially prudent. So just some good stats to kind of get things started. Let's jump into some other things in the news. We had ransomware attacks, which should be of no surprise to you. Obviously, our Food, energy, and communication infrastructure. Those stories tend to get a lot of attention, and ransomware certainly has been in the news extensively. This in particular was an organization called New Cooperative. They represent farmers and a large portion of the grain, pork, and chicken supply. And they lost 1,000 gigabytes worth of files. They didn't lose it, they were stolen. Included research and development, source code to its soil mapping technology, and a hacking group is asking for $6 million of ransom in exchange for the keys to the data and for returning the data that they've stolen, as well as returning the keys for the systems that they've got locked up. So that's, again, typical of ransomware in that the data is stolen and ransomware is kind of the afterthought to lock up systems and create chaos. The organization New Cooperative is basically saying this could be a very, very public disruption to the grain, pork, and chicken supply chain. This breach was from September 21st, and there's been very little updates on this, as I believe they're still working on restoration of the systems. Another large organization, again, I'm picking on the large organizations just because they get in the news. Smaller ones often don't, but this organization has 60,000 employees. They basically are the support calls, all support calls for Best Buy, Bank of America, Dish Network, USAA, Verizon. They all go to call centers, and the call centers are run, operated, and the personnel are hired by TTEC. It's been 2 weeks since the event, and employees are still being told to take vacations. Other ransomware news. So this kind of goes to a different story. It's not about attacks. This one is about what to do afterwards. So oftentimes the question was, hey, should I pay or not pay? And in the past that had been a question, and oftentimes those questions are kind of taken off the table by negotiating parties, insurance, and so forth. But the question now is kind of morphing in the way I'm seeing it into, can I pay? Or should I have a negotiator reach out to pay? Because the ransomware bad guys, if you will, the crims are basically saying, we don't want negotiators because they lower our rates too much. So we want to deal directly with you. And if you call a negotiator, we're going to destroy your data. Because remember, your systems are locked up, but they also have your data. And so it's the release of the data that might be more concerning to you in near term versus the operation of your computers. So kind of question number one is, threats of this nature about getting negotiators. But then secondly, there's been two other things that are impactful here. One is there was an OFAC. OFAC is the governing body to determine whether you're allowed to pay offshore organizations that might be involved in terrorism. And indeed, there are rules that basically state that you can't. And so in some cases, you cannot pay. And therefore, if you can't get your data back, that option, I guess, has been taken off the table. So recovery is really your only option. And then furthermore, now I think it's a build on that. Yeah, the U.S. Treasury is going after the folks that are the middlemen. So in this particular case, obviously some monies are exchanged, and when now often in cryptocurrency, as we can imagine, not always in Bitcoin, but these exchanges that provide the transfer of monies, if they exist almost, in this particular one that the U.S. Treasury is going after, 45% of their business was ransomware exchanges. That's really all they did. Well, that doesn't work for us as a government, and we decided that U.S. Department has gone after that organization, is essentially trying to put them out of business. Now, doesn't mean another one won't pop up, but we're trying to go after the people who are benefiting from the exchange of ransomware dollars also. So increasingly complex world, but that's kind of the aftermath of kind of what's in the news. Another one that snuck in here, obviously on September 22nd, so just less than a week ago, is the fact that Microsoft Exchange AutoDiscover has some capabilities, if misconfigured, So there's a couple things that come into play here, but if misconfigured, and let's, I guess, first review what AutoDiscover does. AutoDiscover, as we may recall, is the process where a new customer or maybe a new login and password is trying to set up a mail client. And so various mail clients, whether they be on the phone, a browser, or Outlook itself, will go through a process of taking the login and password that you've provided and going out and searching for the server it needs. Well, if it finds the server it needs quickly, and if it's properly configured, there are no issues. With the exception of the fact that that exchange did and could occur in plain text if you have basic authentication. So the fact that you're passing credentials over a wire in plain text is not ideal. But secondly, outside of the plain text, if your AutoDiscover is not set up properly, it will continue searching up chain, it's called, or a back-off procedure. And in that back-off procedure, it actually will leave the original 4 targets for AutoDiscover and go out searching. And people have set up essentially, I'll call them honeypots, where they're there to capture credentials of people who have misconfigured AutoDiscovers. And therefore, those tools and process is capturing a number of Windows credentials, potentially for environments that are out there and customers that are out there. So I highlight this only to the fact that this is another way that credentials could have been leaked over the prior year. We're still waiting on Microsoft to determine fixes for their Outlook client on that, as this issue does not have an update from a week ago. And I guess kind of along those lines, I will just point out the fact that Microsoft is trying again and has had a very concerted effort to try to remove basic authentication from, wipe that off the planet, if you will. Basic authentication does not subscribe to many of the good security practice rules, and so they're trying to disable that in all tenants, but it's taking some time because when they built Office 365, there were various applications and processes that relied on it. So they can only control their own applications that are fully capable of speaking modern authentication, we'll call it, for the last several years. That does not mean that all customers and all tenants are there yet, though. So we're still working with customers to remove basic authentication from customer environments. And Microsoft has finally put the hammer down and said, in October of next year, so not in a week from now, but indeed a year and a week from now, basic authentication is completely gone. And in the meantime, they're going to try to get it removed from other customers in random ways. They describe how in the articles, but the goal is to get that disabled. All right. So we're going to kind of move off from the news. We're going to kind of go to from the trenches. Obviously, I started off with a news story here, but this is information that we are seeing and something that we're chartered to help our customers with. And that is the pesky idea of zero-day flaws. Hopefully that concept is not new to you. Zero-day is simply a means that there is no known protection for, or no known patch for that vulnerability. Worse than a zero-day flaw is a zero-day flaw that's being exploited in the wild, as they call it. So zero-day means no protection. Being exploited or in the wild means we're seeing customers be impacted by it right now. Those two, that combination, unfortunately, is becoming more and more commonplace. In fact, this article that's in front of you would state that zero-day attacks have been announced by Microsoft every month in 2021 so far. They always have zero-day attacks. And in fact, this month there were 2. Zero-day attacks are not just exclusive to Microsoft. Chrome had 2 this month. VMware has 1. Apple, their iOS had 1 earlier this month. And we'll talk about that in the vulnerability section, but zero-day is becoming way more popular. And it's kind of a matter of timing as to when the zero-day gets announced and when the patch gets resurrected. And there's that period of time where you're highly vulnerable. What do you do, right? If this is going to be commonplace, what can you do in between that? So that's where I wanted to have a brief discussion with you. This kind of brings us back to the little map of the NIST map. First of all, if you can't protect it with normal means such as patching, or you can't rely on your antivirus maybe to have found it because it's pattern based, you certainly could rely on antivirus that might antivirus, anti-malware, or EDR solutions that are really up to date, right? That really are cloud protected, or maybe have a block first mentality, and then because those can be configured such to even be prepared for 0 days. So there are ways to modernize your protection to get just a little bit better there. There's also alternative ways to protect. So things like our umbrella technology we use for DNS, those are very intelligent and very quickly can have smarts delivered to a client. So you're not waiting for a patch and a distribution. Instead, maybe you're waiting for a configuration, or maybe they don't detect the problem, but they disallow communications from your client to a known bad website, as an example. Also, services like Defender for Office 365, which can be a intelligent way to kind of route your mail and add some intelligence. So Microsoft might not have a fix for it, but they're going to block all traffic that looks like X or Y, so that you're not impacted after day 0.5, if you will. And then furthermore, as you kind of move down the chain, your ability to detect it obviously is not there, but you have incident response plans, hopefully, that can mitigate some of these 0-day threats on your network. So it's a combination of tools and processes, I think, that can help us get through some of these 0 days. We've seen in the wild, with our customer base, we've seen several of these this past month, and that was domains that were spun up that look very similar to your domain. So I'll give the example of Acme, ACME. They're a fictitious company, obviously, but imagine if someone created a domain called Acme, ACNE, and you just have the M and the N are really close to each other. This is basically called domain spoofing, this process. And so someone could create an email. They could send that email into someone in your accounting department with a fake domain name alias. And furthermore, they could, to make it more trustworthy, they could CC people at your organization who you might expect to be on that. So by all means, it looks very similar to an email you might expect. And in this particular email, they might be directing you to change payment terms. Well, clearly, with the authenticity of the domains looking so similar, and all the people CC'd on the as a standard communication might be, could be very easy to slip up and find that you're trusting this email maybe more than your security awareness training would have had you do. So domain spoofing is certainly on the rise. That Defender for Office 365 solution that we mentioned on the previous is one solution that certainly recognizes domain spoofing and would help prevent that from occurring. But it's also a matter of security awareness training as part of your effort, ongoing efforts there. Okay, I bring up some history here. This is a slide that I've used before. The case is still true back from October of 2020, and the fact is passwords are terrible. Microsoft sees billions of logins per day. I'll show you quotes from them on how bad passwords are, but this is what happens to logins and passwords. 40% of the time when there's, this is when there are breaches, 40% of the time, the passwords are guessed. Okay, they use a password spray, it's called, which means they use a database of usernames and statistically probable passwords, such as 123 or pass@word with a 0 in it. Those databases are increasingly getting really, really big, and the computing power is so strong that they can really guess a lot of logins and passwords. You can't craft a good enough password to get past a dictionary attack, essentially, or a password spray, as it's called. So that's becoming an increasingly big problem. Reuse of passwords. The databases of passwords that have been compromised are getting very large. There was a 1 trillion password database that was just leaked, right? Which adds to the other trillions of logins. So again, as you have the ability to, if you've ever used your password before, it's known. And if you're using that same login and password between systems, it can be reused against you. So that represents 80% of the problem right there, is passwords can either be guessed or replayed. Only 20% of the time can you get phished, right? We spend an inordinate amount of time thinking phishing is the main culprit of the problem, but indeed, phishing is kind of the tail end of the fish, if you will. By the way, all of this is, absolutely confirmed by what we're seeing, and I'll give you, some quotes now from Microsoft. I'll ignore the rest of that slide, but here's some quotes I think that are meaningful. Microsoft sees that 0.5% of all of their accounts are compromised every month. So if you have 200 users in your organization, you should expect a compromise per month, period. So what are you going to do about it? If one was compromised in September, how are you taking action on that? What is your incident response plan? How have you detected this compromise within your environment? Where are they going from there? Now that they've compromised your credentials, are they sending emails out to your vendors? Or were you aware of the breach? We have solutions to kind of help in this space, but this is absolutely what we see. We'll see 3, 4, 5 compromises a week across our customer base. And we'll help them go through password changes, see if emails were sent, and essentially implement their incident response procedures as part of their plan for customers 3 to 5 times a week. The corollary to that is if an account is compromised, there's a 99.9% chance it did not have MFA, Microsoft. So it's for this reason, and I lay out that second corollary here, that I go into this story right here. Microsoft will now let its users log in without passwords. Well, it's a nice catch line, nice buzzword, and it is true. For some services such as Outlook and OneDrive, these are public consumer services. In upcoming weeks, they basically don't even care if you have a login and password. They're only going to use your MFA prompt, right? Your Authenticator application on your phone, because your login and password, let's say that they're known. As long as you're protected by MFA, that really is the stronger mechanism for authenticating anyway. So why did I even care about the login and password to begin with? I'm not saying this is a trend in the industry. It's certainly something Microsoft's doing to kind of incent and drive some headlines, if nothing else, and drive some attention. But the MFA is the strong part of the login. Your login and password are terrible. And I'll say that mine are probably terrible too. It's not a matter of creation. You just can't create strong enough ones nowadays. And really, as long as you're protected by MFA, that's all you really need to care about. So let's talk about MFA just a little stronger. And again, I'll go back to a reminder. We've covered this in previous weeks. Cybersecurity insurance is driving a ton of responsibilities around many of these things that are on the screen. I highlighted MFA as one of the areas that gets a lot of attention, but security awareness and data backup and air-gapped backups are equally important. But MFA, because of the attention it's had, we're seeing cybersecurity insurance premiums go up 3, 4, 5 times what they were previously. Some renewals are not occurring. People are being denied coverage, or as a condition of us giving you this coverage, you have to go put in a security awareness program and an MFA. You have to upgrade your antivirus. You have to have air-gapped backup. So they won't cover you unless you do these 4 things. And so quickly, customers are scrambling, saying, "I need coverage. I can't wait, 2 months to have coverage. Help me get these installed quickly." So there's a lot of momentum right now in the market, and insurance is driving a lot of that. But let's deep dive on MFA, or as some people say, double click on it. A lot of the questionnaires that are coming from cybersecurity insurance providers are not saying, "Do you have MFA? Yes or no?" Okay, that would be a nice, easy question. If you had MFA in some portion of your world, you could say, "Sure, I do. I've got it. Yes." Instead, they're being very detailed. Where do you have MFA? What are the situations? Does it impact mail? Do you have third-party providers, contractors all leverage there? And so you're going to be clicking no in several areas. And that is going to A, impact your rates, B, possibly deny you coverage. So the implementation of MFA is not simple. It's broad. It's across your environment. You'll have to be looking at your VPN, administration of backups, administration of switches or firewalls, endpoints, and third-party contractors. These, by the way, on the screen are actual questions from actual cybersecurity insurance questionnaires. They'll be coming to you during renewal time. All right, a couple other things as we start to wrap. I mentioned this before. I will mention again security and the countermeasures for security, even in Microsoft's value-based plans, are increasing. You will see those increases go in effect of March of next year. They've announced them now. Effectively, they're 15 to 20% increases in most cases. We are working with our customers to determine methods to minimize that increase through some smart use of either annual items or taking advantage of some SKUs that we think are highly value-based, such as business premium. So just wanted to kind of make mention of that. And last but not least, and I'll go through these quickly again, the slide deck will provide the details you need this month in September in the vulnerabilities portion of our webinar today. iOS, Mac, iPhones, iPads, even watches, all had a vulnerability. This was released a week and a half prior to their big feature update, which was iOS 15. The patch was put out in iOS version 14.8, I believe it was, and but certainly should be making you think, how do I manage all these devices today? How do I make sure that they're on these versions? Do I just let people do what they can, or do I want to control this a little more? How do I control the devices that are out there? And certainly we have some capabilities and tools to help you navigate that world. Browsers had a bad month. Google Chrome had 2 in the wild 0 days. I think that was something we mentioned before. But again, this might make you think, what browsers are people using in my world? Do you know? What versions are you allowing? What versions do you enforce them to have? Do you enforce them to have updates, or just tell them it'd be great if you could do some updates? What does patching look like for you on that? Is that, centralized, or are you just letting users do it? What keeps them from going to malicious sites with a bad browser? What's protecting them at home? Is it their firewall? Is it that thing from Comcast? It's not monitored, managed? Is it a Netgear? Some lower end, because our employees are increasingly working from home. Again, we have solutions for all this. We would tend to use Umbrella to help us in this space. Great solution for that, but happy to have conversations with you about that. VMware had some vulnerabilities. They're listed there, and certainly can go to the website. It just came out a few days ago. We're patching some vCenters for customers now. This is being exploited in the wild also. We're not exactly sure how it's being exploited, since you have to be inside the network to take advantage of it. But that said, we can never be too cautious in this space. And so if you're not doing this as part of your regular updates, please call us for updating and helping you with your vCenters today. Microsoft had a host of things. I think the article from Krebs kind of lays out where the priorities are. One of the highest priorities was the IE browser, which exists in Windows 10 and a Windows Server, has a critical vulnerability. It's rated 9.8 out of 10. So certainly get that one taken care of, as well as some of the other things as part of your patch process or as part of an emergency process. Okay, we have some events coming up next month. Obviously, this month in Teams will continue, as well as this month in Cyber. We look forward to you registering and attending for those. Some items that are not on our events page, but which should be there very shortly. We are going to host a special security awareness webinar on Thursday, October 28th. This is in commemoration of Security Awareness Month. And we may host an M365 security webinar, to be determined on that, but it's looking like October, third or fourth week of October. So again, keep tuned on our events page there, and more events may pop in. And then certainly I want to make a note of the fact that in our blog section, where we try to put up some guidance to kind of lead the industry here, we're certainly celebrating the fact that we have moved past 40 years in the business, and very happy to be continuing to work with customers over that time frame, as technology landscape has obviously changed dramatically, but we've been able to navigate those changes, and are happy to be providing service to our customers for the last 40 years.